Did you know that Blazor WebAssembly has offline support? That you can turn your web application into a desktop or mobile app. In this video, we're going to discuss how to turn your Blazor WebAssembly app into what's called a progressive web app, or PWA. We will look at what PWAs are, how they work, what their limitations are, and when we would use them. Now, in case you haven't watched my videos before, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. My goal isn't to entertain you. My goal is to turn you into a world-class developer. I do that by making sure that everything I teach focuses on preparing you for the real world. If you want to get ready for the real world development, whether you're just starting out or already doing it, hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss a thing. Okay, let's go to Visual Studio. And in here, we're going to create a new project. And this project is going to be a Blazor app. Now, I have the latest version of Visual Studio that has been updated. It's not the preview version, but it is the latest production version of Visual Studio. Make sure that you update your Visual Studio. It's going to ask you to do so from time to time. Make sure you do that. Okay? We hit Create. Let's call this Blazor WebAssembly for the project name, and we'll call this Blazor PWA for the solution name. Let's hit Create, and we have two choices here: Blazor Server App and Blazor WebAssembly App. Now, if you want to have a progressive web application, you must choose Blazor WebAssembly. WebAssembly runs on the client's machine fully. Blazor Server runs both on the client machine and the server. Well, progressive web applications don't always have a server, so therefore you have to use Blazor WebAssembly in order to use this progressive web application. So note down here we have authentication, we'll leave that off. Configure for HTTPS, leave that on. But then down here we have ASP.NET Core hosted. We don't want that, but we do want progressive web application. This is going to add all the stuff we need to turn our Blazor WebAssembly app into a progressive web app. Okay? There's not a lot of stuff it's going to add, but it's one check of a checkbox and it's done for you pretty much. So make sure that checkbox is checked and hit Create. Now, if you haven't already seen Blazor WebAssembly, check out the previous week's video to this video where I introduce Blazor WebAssembly. So we talk through how Blazor works, what the pieces are, and maybe even check out the intro to Blazor Server as well. I go into more depth on things like data access and what the Razor pages are and how they work, or Razor components. So in this video, we're not going to concentrate really on what is Blazor WebAssembly. Hopefully you're already up to speed on that. If not, like I said, go back and watch those previous videos to help get you up to speed. But in this video, we're going to concentrate just on WebAssembly using progressive web app. So let's look at our project. I'm going to open up most of the folders. Let's look at shared and pages. And if you're familiar with Blazor WebAssembly, you'll see that nothing appears to have changed as far as which files we include. In fact, that's correct. Nothing has changed. The place where we have a change for progressive web apps is under www.root. And in there, we now have the icon-512.png, which is the default Blazor icon. And then we have a manifest.json file and a serviceworker.js file. So let's start with the manifest.json file. This file is what is really the heart of a PWA. I'm going to refer to this as a PWA from now on, but I'm talking about progressive web application. So a PWA is not something that's Microsoft specific. This is not a Microsoft technology. This is a web technology. This is something that's approved by the entire industry. It's not something specific to what Microsoft is doing. I just want to emphasize that because sometimes in the past, Microsoft has gone out on their own and tried to basically force the rest of the market to work with their products. And that's not a great way of going about things. Now, the new Microsoft, because Microsoft has radically changed over the past 10 to 15 years, but the new Microsoft is focused on working with standards, industry standards, and working within those standards to produce some really great things. This is one of those efforts. This is an industry standard file, this manifest.json file. This is how you declare and set up a progressive web application. So we have a few pieces of data, and you can actually add more to this. And you can do some research on manifest.json, which again, it's not a Microsoft thing. There may be some stuff on docs.microsoft.com, but you can go to any site and look for manifest.json and see more information about what you can add to this to make your app even cooler and do more fun things. But we're going to start with just the basics, just what you get out of the box today. That's the starting point. We'll add more in the future as we go, but for now we're going to look at just what we get out of the box and how it works and why it works and what the benefits are. So we have a name and a short name. These names are what we're going to give to our application. Now, let's take a minute here to stop and talk about what's going to happen when we create a progressive web application. Because maybe you're confused as to why this even matters. A progressive web application is going to install your application on your desktop or install it on your phone's desktop or phone's screen like an app. It's going to have an application icon. When you double click it, it's going to open like an application, and it's going to function like a standalone application, not like it's running across the web. Let's actually see this because I want to make sure that you have a good picture in your mind of what's happening, and then we'll come back and look at these pieces and see where they fit. Okay, so let's start this. We're going to start with IS Express. That's more ideal for a progressive web application because it gives a unique port to your PWA. So let's start this, and it started out really big on my screen. So I'll bring it over and kind of shrink it down a bit. And this looks like a Blazor app. Notice we have the counter. We can increment that. We can go to fetch data and get some data. So what's different here? Well, the big difference is tiny. It's right up here. In fact, let's zoom in on this. Right there. You see that little plus button? In fact, when you first started it, you may have missed it, but I may not even caught on camera, but it said install briefly, and then it shrunk down just to this plus icon. So this plus icon, if we click this, it says install app, and it says Blazor WebAssembly, localhost, and the colon. Let's just say yes, and we'll see what this looks like. So I'm going to hit install. And now it's opened up on my screen. It's way too big. There we go. We can maximize it. So this is now our same application, but running as a progressive web application. So you notice there's no navigation bar, there's no URL up here. There's just this, what looks like an application. In fact, we can shrink this down. Let's shrink it down to, wow, it's way too big. I don't know what happened on my screen. There we go. So you can treat it like an application. You can resize the form. It's got these, a menu bar up here, kind of like a desktop application does. This little ellipsis here allows you to see app info, copy the URL. You can open it on Chrome again. You can uninstall it and so on. So what this is it really is a browser, but it's a headless browser. So it's a browser that pretends like it's not a normal browser. It's just the power behind your application. And so this application is running as if it's a desktop application, but it's in fact powered by, in this case, Google Chrome. So we've got it installed on our machine. If I close this out, all right, let's for a minute minimize Visual Studio. So you have a black desktop screen. I'm going to move over to it, the icon it installed on my desktop. So let's look at this icon. Notice that's the Blazor logo, and it says, well, I kind of crossed it out here, but Blazor WebAssembly. All right, that's the short name. So actually, I think that's a full name. But that's the icon that installed on my desktop. So if I were to double click this, it's going to try and launch, and it's going to launch the Blazor WebAssembly project. So this allows me to treat this like an application. Close it out. Don't go to my browser. Don't have a bookmark. Just double click on the icon and it opens up the application. Now note, if I go to counter, I can click counter. That still works. I can fetch data. This all still works as if it is the web application. In fact, if you mouse over, you can see I can't really zoom in on it because it's got a URL down there. But there's a URL in the bottom left-hand corner that shows you the actual URL is to that button. But I don't see a URL bar up here. There's no bookmarks and all the rest of the stuff. It's just the application. Now I do want to point out, I'm going to leave this open, but let's bring back up Visual Studio and notice that Visual Studio is stopped. It's not running anything right now. So how is it that the progressive web application is still running? And the first thing you may think is, oh, well, I've heard that progressive web apps work offline. Therefore, that must be what's going on here. And the answer is actually no, that's not what's happening. Since I used IIS Express can run even when Visual Studio stops debugging. So in my system tray, which I can't really show you, it's not in the right part of the screen, but in my system tray is IIS Express. And I can see that in there is this application and it's still running. So that's why I can still use it on my desktop. And that brings up something that we need to talk about, and that is that yes, PWAs can work in offline mode. It's a really big benefit. However, when you're in development in Visual Studio, they will not work in offline mode. You have to publish your progressive web application before it will work in offline mode. And the reason for that is because offline mode, what it does, it actually caches your application and then it runs from the cache. Then it will pull down new versions as it sees them, but it won't run the new version until after you restart the application. So if you're debugging on your machine, you'd have to open the application, wait for it to download the new changes, close the application, open the application back up to see any new changes you've made. That would be a pain. Therefore, they've turned off offline support for during development. You have to publish first. Okay, let's close this. Actually, let's uninstall this. Uninstall the Blazor web app and also clear data from Chrome. Yes, remove. And that will notice the icon went away. So that gets rid of everything. I don't have to do that, but that gets rid of anything on the machine just to kind of restart fresh. Again, if you push updates, it would update on the machine even though you have it installed. But this way it's just a little bit cleaner to do that. Okay, so let's look through this file. We have the name, we have the short name, we have the start URL. So the name and the short name are pretty clear. The name is going to be what we display as the name of the application. Let's call this something a little longer. I am Tim Corey, Blazor PWA demo. And we'll call this one PWA demo, like so. Just to have something a little different. Now, the starting URL means it's going to start in the root directory. So it's going to look for that index.html. That's where it's going to start. The display is standalone, the background color, there you go. The theme color, there you go. You can change this obviously to match whatever color scheme you have in your application. And then down here is icons. They've only installed one icon for us, but that icon is for the install icon. The icon is going to go on the desktop. And that references then the icon-512.png that you saw in the root of www root. So that's how we set up the icon. You can set up more than one icon for different sizes, and you can obviously change the default icon to something else, move it in a different location, which I probably would recommend, and so on. So that's the manifest.json file. Now the question is going to be, how do we know to engage this? How do we know that our application is a progressive web application? How does Chrome know to put that little plus icon in the URL bar to say, install this progressive web application? Well, that comes from index.html, which is where the start of our application is. We have a couple of additional entries in here, actually 3, I think. So the first one is right here, where in the head it says link to manifest.json. Well, that's our manifest file. And notice the rel statement says it's a manifest. So instead of a style sheet, it's a script or something like that, it's a manifest. So it's saying this is the manifest for this web application. This is what you're going to use to create or populate the progressive web application's settings. So that's the first thing. Next, we do have a link to our icon, and that's for the Apple Touch icon. And the reason why, because that's Apple and Android do things a little bit differently compared to even desktop. So they really like to have their own icons specified in the head of your application. So there's where that is. Okay. And so yes, that brings up the next question. Yes, these do install on mobile devices, just like you would install it onto your desktop device. There's a little icon, you click it and say install, and then from there you can install it right to the home screen as an app icon. Now the last thing that's changed in this file is right down here where you see script. It says navigator.serviceworker.register service-worker.js. So a service worker is a special kind of JavaScript file that we're going to use to aid in our PWAs functioning. So this script says, hey, by the way, we do have a service worker, and here's where it's located. We're going to register that. So let's look at the service worker file. And the service worker file is pretty sparse right now. There's not a lot here. But as you create your progressive web application, and again, this code is going to be pretty much independent of C# code. It's JavaScript file that is universally supported, and it's a web standard. Okay, so but this file is going to specify how your progressive web application works. It's going to be the one that's going to cache your application. Your application is going to talk to this first before trying to talk to the web. It's kind of like a proxy. That way, if the web isn't there, if you're offline support or offline mode, then it's going to say, okay, here's the cache data. I don't have the web to give you new and updated data. And it's going to tell your application how to then respond. Some things you may actually turn off. So you may say, you know what, this right here, we can't use this in offline mode. So just say, nope, that's not available right now. You need to be online. But other things may be available, and we can say, okay, here's the cached data to display things. That's going to be in this file. That's going to be how it's specified in here. Okay, so this is kind of like your control center for all offline support. So that's the basics of Service Worker, and that's the basics of PWAs inside of Blazor. Basically, it's just a wrapper around Blazor that adds a few extra features, the manifest and the service worker specifically, as well as a couple lines in index.html, and then you're supporting files like your ping file. So that's all there really is to making or starting your progressive web application. Now, there's a long way to go here if you want to create any type of, I want to call it real application, an application that's more than just a demo. Obviously, this demo is pretty limited in what it does. But if you want to go further and create a real-world application, you'll probably want things like offline support for your data. How do you cache that data? And then How do you resynchronize the data when you come back? Maybe you have a screen where people fill out their information. You can cache that information and you get back online. You can then send it to the server, but will that cause conflicts? What do you do if there's already a file there for that user and now you have a merge conflict? There's a lot of things to think through, but to start off with, this is a pretty easy on-ramp. I would encourage you to try out this first. Don't go all the way to the end, ultra complex business application first. Try it out with some stuff that doesn't need an API at all. And then start adding in more and more complexities as you progress in your knowledge. Okay, so start here. Now, before we go, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the limitations or when you would use a progressive web application. They've got some questions that seem to indicate that there's a lot of confusion out there. I want to clarify that. So, first of all, a progressive web application does not go into an app store or something like that. It's not the same thing as an app. It's kind of an intermediate step. It's not just a web application or a website, and it's not a desktop or mobile app. It sits in the middle. So there is no app store for it. When it comes to monetizing these, that's not really the focus of PWAs for the most part. Now, there are a lot of benefits to a PWA. So if you work for, let's start with a small company. If you work for a small company and you have a web application, then this might be a way to make your web application a little more usable by the user. It might be a little bit more in front of their eyes. So if a user has an icon on their phone that is for your specific website, but it's like an app, then they're more likely to use it than if it's a URL they have to type into their browser. Your app could also support offline mode, which means that if you provide information that may be useful when you don't have a cell signal, then that'd be a great opportunity. You can maybe have, one of the things I used before was translation software. So when I traveled abroad, I didn't necessarily always have access to the internet. Well, I downloaded some applications, did some progressive web applications as well, that had some offline support for simple translations so that I didn't get lost and not know where I'm going or didn't know how to, communicate with the local population. So that's a possibility. However, just note, you can't install these while offline. You have to have the users be online first to install them. It may seem obvious, but sometimes it gets overlooked that you have to be online in order to install a PWA. Also, the users, you can't forget this, the users may use an older version of your web application then, because they've cached your entire website, which means that when they use it, it will be usually a version behind. So what happens is, let's say you put an update out. Let's say you modify the index page to change the icon and maybe change the error message. Well, if a user has cached this application on their desktop or their phone, when they open it up, it's not going to first go to the web, download updates, and then open up. That would be a slow interaction, because what if the web is not there? It's going to have a timeout period. Well, that's not a great system. So instead, the app will run with the older cached version, and then in the background, it's going to pull down the new versions of files. But it's then not going to restart the application, because that would be a bad experience too. If you're in the middle of something, maybe filling a form out, and the application restarts, that's no good. So it's going to wait until we're done with the download, and then it's going to wait until we're done with the application. So once you close the application out, that will trigger the update, which means that after you put an update out, your users will all be one version behind until they're done updating. That's important to know, because if you have breaking changes to how your application works, where maybe you've removed some columns in a database or changed a query significantly enough that there'd be a problem. And it'd be an API call, essentially. It's not going to be the data directly, but the API calls. If they're changed significantly, then you're going to have problems with users not being able to use their application and thinking there's a bug. Now, a restart will help because it's going to bring those new things down, and then the restart will enact those new items. But if they're working offline for a while, they will have used that old system and they come back online. Now the sync is going to be a little bit more tricky. So there's some things to think through. It's not just all sunshine and roses. You've got to make sure that you plan for these different eventualities and plan for the fact that your users won't always be on the latest version. That means your updates shouldn't create breaking changes whenever possible. They should be additive changes. This is why things like APIs typically don't have breaking changes. Once you create an API, you kind of lock it in place, and then you have a new version of the API that the old version still works, but the new version is what you encourage people to go to. That way, you can upgrade your applications without breaking old applications. Finally, these are not substitutes for actual installed desktop applications or mobile applications. Yes, with your website, you can have an application that looks like both of those. And it's one application, and it's installed pretty much everywhere, which feels great. But there are some issues here. First of all, you saw how the install process went. It was easy, but you had to know where to look in order to install it. Now, I've seen a lot of applications where, yes, the icon's up in the upper right-hand corner, but they'll create an icon or a GIF or something like that that's quite large, that has an arrow that points up to it and says, hey, click this to install it. Click this to install, or a big message explaining how to install your application. That's great, but it's not a substitute for the App Store or for giving the user an install file. So there is a downside there. There's also a downside in that a progressive web application, for all of its power, is still just a web application. There's a lot of things it can't do. Now, the web is getting a whole lot better. The web is getting a whole lot more accessible, and we're able to do a whole lot more with our web applications, but it's still a limitation. Desktop apps are more powerful. They have better use of the resources. They have more direct access to the resources. And so there's still going to be a value in real desktop applications. But this is a good intermediate point. This is a way for a small team to put apps on a desktop. This is a way for even a large organization to easily maintain an application users can use in the field without having to have a huge expenditure in their mobile app department. This also gets around some of the mobile app stores and some of their limitations. So at the end of the day, Blazor web applications are a great feature. They're a great opportunity to work on the client side. Progressive web applications with Blazor is even better because it takes it to the next level. It allows us to do more things with our Blazor WebAssembly version or WebAssembly application. So I definitely encourage you to try it out, try building it, work with it, but at the same time, don't think that this is a quote-unquote killer of something else. It's not going to kill desktop applications. It's not going to kill web applications that are server-side, okay? This is just another tool for our toolbox, all right? So with that in mind, try it out. Let me know what questions you have that you'd like to see addressed in a future video. I will be doing multiple courses on this. I will probably be including this in the Timco Retail Manager series some point in the near future, so we can build a little app for that as well. So there is some more content coming for this, but I would like to know, what are your thoughts? What are the things that you find that are beneficial? What drawbacks do you see that we should cover or talk about? and what things do you want to see me cover in future videos. Okay, so leave those comments down in the description below. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. As always, I am Tim Corey.